Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, August 28, 1749–March 22, 1832, was a German writer and statesman. His body of work includes epic and lyric poetry written in a variety of meters and styles, prose and verse dramas, memoirs, an autobiography, literary and aesthetic criticism, treatises on botany, anatomy, and color, and 4 novels. In addition, numerous literary and scientific fragments, more than 10,000 letters, and nearly 3,000 drawings by him are extant. A literary celebrity by the age of 25, Goethe was ennobled by the Duke of Saxe-Weimar, Karl August in 1782 after first taking up residence there in November 1775 following the success of his first novel, The Sorrows of Young Werther. He was an early participant in the Sturm und Drang literary movement. During his first 10 years in Weimar, Goethe served as a member of the Duke's Privy Council, sat on the War and Highway Commissions, oversaw the reopening of silver mines in nearby Ilmenau, and implemented a series of administrative reforms at the University of Jena. He also contributed to the planning of Weimar's Botanical Park and the rebuilding of its Ducal Palace, which in 1998 were together designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. After returning from a tour of Italy in 1788, his first major scientific work, The Metamorphosis of Plants, was published. In 1791 he was made managing director of the theatre at Weimar, and in 1794 he began a friendship with the dramatist, historian, and philosopher Friedrich Schiller, whose plays he premiered until Schiller's death in 1805. During this period Goethe published his second novel, Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, the verse epic Hermann and Dorothea, and, in 1808, the first part of his most celebrated drama, Faust. His conversations and various common undertakings throughout the 1790s with Schiller, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, Johann Gottfried Herder, Alexander von Humboldt, Wilhelm von Humboldt, and August and Friedrich Schlegel have, in later years, been collectively termed Weimar classicism. Arthur Schopenhauer cited Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship as one of the 4 greatest novels ever written, and Ralph Waldo Emerson selected Goethe, along with Plato, Napoleon, and William Shakespeare, as one of 6 representative men in his work of the same name. Goethe's comments and observations form the basis of several biographical works, most notably Johann Peter Eckermann's Conversations with Goethe. There are frequent references to Goethe's various sayings and maxims throughout the course of Friedrich Nietzsche's work, and there are numerous allusions to Goethe in the novels of Hermann Hesse and Thomas Mann as well as in the psychological writings of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Goethe's poems were set to music throughout the 18th and 19th centuries by a number of composers, including Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Ludwig van Beethoven, Franz Schubert, Robert Schumann, Johannes Brahms, Charles Gounod, Richard Wagner, Hugo Wolf, and Gustav Mahler.
Biography. Early life.
Goethe's father, Johann Caspar Goethe, lived with his family in a large house in Frankfurt, then an imperial free city of the Holy Roman Empire. Though he had studied law in Leipzig and had been appointed imperial councillor, he was not involved in the city's official affairs. 38-year-old Johann Caspar married Goethe's mother, Katharina Elisabeth Texter, the daughter of the mayor of Frankfurt Johann Wolfgang Texter, and his wife Anna Margaretha Lindheimer, when she was 17 at Frankfurt on August 20, 1748. All their children, except for Goethe and his sister, Cornelia Friederike Christiana, who was born in 1750, died at early ages. His father and private tutors gave Goethe lessons in all the common subjects of their time, especially languages, Latin, Greek, French, Italian, English and Hebrew. Goethe also received lessons in dancing, riding and fencing. Johann Caspar, feeling frustrated in his own ambitions, was determined that his children should have all those advantages that he had not. Goethe had a persistent dislike of the Roman Catholic Church, and characterized its history as a hodgepodge of fallacy and violence, mishmash von Irrtum ungeheucht. His great passion was drawing. Goethe quickly became interested in literature. Friedrich Gottlieb Klopstock and Homer were among his early favorites. He had a lively devotion to theatre as well and was greatly fascinated by puppet shows that were annually arranged in his home. A familiar theme in Wilhelm Meister's apprenticeship. He also took great pleasure in reading from the great works about history and religion. He writes about this period. Goethe became acquainted with Frankfurt actors. Around early literary attempts, he was infatuated with Gretchen, who would later reappear in his Faust and the adventures with whom he would concisely describe in Dichtung und Wort. He adored characters Meichner, July 27, 1750–December 31, 1773, a wealthy Worms trader's daughter and friend of his sister, who would later marry the merchant G.F. Schuller.
Legal career.
Goethe studied law in Leipzig from 1765 to 1768. He detested learning age-old judicial rules by heart, preferring instead to attend the poetry lessons of Christian Furchtgott. In Leipzig, Goethe fell in love with Anna Katharina Schoenkopf and wrote cheerful verses about her in the Rococo genre. In 1770, he anonymously released Annette, his first collection of poems. His uncritical admiration for many contemporary poets vanished as he became interested in Lessing and Wieland. Already at this time, Goethe wrote a good deal, but he threw away nearly all of these works, except for the comedy Die Maitschudigen. The restaurant Auerbachskeller and its legend of Faust's 1525 barrel ride impressed him so much that Auerbachskeller became the only real place in his closet drama Faust Part 1. As his studies did not progress, Goethe was forced to return to Frankfurt at the close of August 1768. In Frankfurt, Goethe became severely ill. During the year and a half that followed, because of several relapses, the relationship with his father worsened. During convalescence, Goethe was nursed by his mother and sister. In April 1770, Goethe left Frankfurt in order to finish his studies in Strasbourg. In Alsace, Goethe blossomed. No other landscape has he described as affectionately as the warm, wide Rhine area. In Strasbourg, Goethe met Johann Gottfried Herder. The two became close friends, and crucially to Goethe's intellectual development, it was Herder who kindled his interest in Shakespeare, Ossian and in the notion of Volkspoesie, folk poetry. On October 14, 1772 he held a gathering in his parental home in honor of the first German Shakespeare Day. His first acquaintance with Shakespeare's works is described as his personal awakening in literature. On a trip to the village Sessenheim, Goethe fell in love with Friederike Bryan, in October 1770, but, after 10 months, terminated the relationship in August 1771. Several of his poems, like Willkommen und Abschied, Sessenheimer Lieder and Heidereslehen, originate from this time. At the end of August 1771, Goethe acquired the academic degree of the Licenziate, Licentia Discendi, in Frankfurt and established a small legal practice. Although in his academic work he had expressed the ambition to make jurisprudence progressively more humane, his inexperience led him to proceed too vigorously in his first cases, and he was reprimanded and lost further ones. This prematurely terminated his career as a lawyer after only a few months. At this time, Goethe was acquainted with the court of Darmstadt, where his inventiveness was praised. From this milieu came Johann Georg Schlosser, who was later to become his brother-in-law, and Johann Heinrich Merck. Goethe also pursued literary plans again. This time, his father did not have anything against it, and even helped. Goethe obtained a copy of the biography of a noble highwayman from the German Peasants' War. In a couple of weeks the biography was reworked into a colorful drama. Entitled Goes vom Berlichingen, the work went directly to the heart of Goethe's contemporaries. Goethe could not subsist on being one of the editors of a literary periodical, published by Schlosser and Merck. In May 1772 he once more began the practice of law at Wetzlar. In 1774 he wrote the book which would bring him worldwide fame, The Sorrows of Young Werther. The outer shape of the work's plot is widely taken over from what Goethe experienced during his Wetzlar time with Charlotte Buff, 1753–1828, and her fiancé, Johann Christian Kästner, 1741–1800, as well as from the suicide of the author's friend Karl Wilhelm Jerusalem, 1747–1772. In it, Goethe made a desperate passion of what was in reality a hearty and relaxed friendship. Despite the immense success of Werther, it did not bring Goethe much financial gain because copyright laws at the time were essentially non-existent. In later years Goethe would bypass this problem by periodically authorizing new, revised editions of his complete works.
Early years in Weimar.
In 1775, Goethe was invited, on the strength of his fame as the author of The Sorrows of Young Werther, to the court of Karl August, Duke of Saxe-Weimar-Eisenach, who would become Grand Duke in 1815. The Duke at the time was 18 years of age, to Goethe's 26. Goethe thus went to live in Weimar, where he remained for the rest of his life and where, over the course of many years, he held a succession of offices, becoming the Duke's chief advisor. In 1776, Goethe formed a close relationship to Charlotte von Stein, an older, married woman. The intimate bond with Frau von Stein lasted for 10 years, after which Goethe abruptly left for Italy without giving his companion any notice. She was emotionally distraught at the time, but they were eventually reconciled. Goethe, aside from official duties, was also a friend and confidant to the Duke, and participated fully in the activities of the court. For Goethe, his first 10 years at Weimar could well be described as a garnering of a degree and range of experience which perhaps could be achieved in no other way. Goethe was ennobled in 1782, this being indicated by the von in his name.
Italy.
Goethe's journey to the Italian peninsula from 1786 to 1788 was of great significance in his aesthetic and philosophical development. His father had made a similar journey during his own youth, and his example was a major motivating factor for Goethe to make the trip. More importantly, however, the work of Johann Joachim Winckelmann had provoked a general renewed interest in the classical art of ancient Greece and Rome. Thus Goethe's journey had something of the nature of a pilgrimage to it. During the course of his trip Goethe met and befriended the artists Angelika Kaufmann and Johann Heinrich Wilhelm Tischbein, as well as encountering such notable characters as Lady Hamilton and Alessandro Cagliostro, see Affair of the Diamond Necklace. He also journeyed to Sicily during this time, and wrote intriguingly that to have seen Italy without having seen Sicily is to not have seen Italy at all, for Sicily is the clue to everything. While in southern Italy and Sicily, Goethe encountered, for the first time, genuine Greek, as opposed to Roman, architecture, and was quite startled by its relative simplicity. Winckelmann had not recognized the distinctness of the two styles. Goethe's diaries of this period form the basis of the non-fiction Italian Journey. Italian Journey only covers the first year of Goethe's visit. The remaining year is largely undocumented, aside from the fact that he spent much of it in Venice. This gap in the record has been the source of much speculation over the years. In the decades which immediately followed its publication in 1860, an Italian Journey inspired countless German youths to follow Goethe's example. This is pictured, somewhat satirically, in George Eliot's Middlemarch.
Weimar.
In late 1792, Goethe took part in the Battle of Valmy against revolutionary France, assisting Duke Karl August of Saxe-Weimar during the failed invasion of France. Again during the Siege of Mainz he assisted Karl August as a military observer. His written account of these events can be found within his complete works. In 1794 Friedrich Schiller wrote to Goethe offering friendship. They had previously had only a mutually wary relationship ever since first becoming acquainted in 1788. This collaborative friendship lasted until Schiller's death in 1805. In 1806, Goethe was living in Weimar with his mistress Christiane Vulpius, the sister of Christian A. Vulpius, and their son Julius August Walter von Goethe. On October 13, Napoleon's army invaded the town. The French Spoon Guards, the least disciplined soldiers, occupied Goethe's house. The next day, Goethe legitimized their 18-year relationship by marrying Christiane in a quiet marriage service at the court chapel. They already had several children together by this time, including their son, Julius August Walter von Goethe, December 25, 1789 – October 28, 1830, whose wife, Ottilie von Perguisch, October 31, 1796 – October 26, 1872, cared for the elder Goethe until his death in 1832. The younger couple had 3 children: Walther, Freiherr von Goethe, April 9, 1818 – April 15, 1885, Wolfgang, Freiherr von Goethe, September 18, 1820 – January 20, 1883, and Alma von Goethe, October 29, 1827 – September 29, 1844. Christian von Goethe died in 1816.
Later life.
After 1793, Goethe devoted his endeavors primarily to literature. By 1820, Goethe was on amiable terms with Caspar Maria von Sternberg. In 1823, having recovered from a near-fatal heart illness, Goethe fell in love with Ulrich von Levetzow, whom he wanted to marry, but because of the opposition of her mother he never proposed. Their last meeting in Carlsbad on September 5, 1823 inspired him to the famous Marienbad elegy, which he considered one of his finest works. During that time he also developed a deep emotional bond with the Polish pianist Maria Agata Szymanowska. In 1832, Goethe died in Weimar of apparent heart failure. His last words, according to his doctor Karl Vogel, were, "Mehr Licht." More light. But this is disputed as Vogel was not in the room at the moment Goethe died. He is buried in the Ducal Vault at Weimar's historical cemetery. Eckermann closes his famous work, Conversations with Goethe, with this passage. The first production of Richard Wagner's opera Lohengrin took place in Weimar in 1850. The conductor was Franz Liszt, who chose the date August 28 in honor of Goethe, who was born on August 28, 1749.
Literary work.
The most important of Goethe's works produced before he went to Weimar were Goes vom Berlichingen, 1773, a tragedy that was the first work to bring him recognition, and the novel The Sorrows of Young Werther, called Die Leiden des jungen Werthers in German, 1774, which gained him enormous fame as a writer in the Sturm und Drang period, which marked the early phase of Romanticism. Indeed, the book is often considered to be the spark which ignited the movement, and can arguably be called the world's first bestseller. For the entirety of his life this was the work with which the vast majority of Goethe's contemporaries associated him. During the years at Weimar before he met Schiller he began Wilhelm Meister's apprenticeship, wrote the dramas Iphigenie of Tauris, Iphigenia in Tauris, Egmont, Torquato Tasso, and the fable Reineke Fuchs. To the period of his friendship with Schiller belong the conception of Wilhelm Meister's journeyman years, the continuation of Wilhelm Meister's apprenticeship, the idyll of Hermann and Dorothea, the Roman elegies and the verse drama The Natural Daughter. In the last period, between Schiller's death, in 1805, and his own, appeared Faust Part 1, Elective Affinities, the West-Eastern Divan, a collection of poems in the Persian style, influenced by the work of Hafez, his autobiographical Aus meinem Leben, Dichtung und Wahrheit, From My Life, Poetry and Truth, which covers his early life and ends with his departure for Weimar, his Italian journey, and a series of treatises on art. His writings were immediately influential in literary and artistic circles. Goethe was fascinated by Kalidas's Abhijanasa Kuntalam, which was one of the first works of Sanskrit literature that became known in Europe, after being translated from English to German. Faust Part 2 was only finished in the year of his death, and was published posthumously. Also published after his death was the so-called Faust, the first sketches, made probably in 1773-74. The short epistolary novel, Die Leiden des jungen Werthers, or The Sorrows of Young Werther, published in 1774, recounts an unhappy romantic infatuation that ends in suicide. Goethe admitted that he shot his hero to save himself, a reference to Goethe's own near-suicidal obsession with a young woman during this period, an obsession he quelled through the writing process. The novel remains in print in dozens of languages and its influence is undeniable. Its central hero, an obsessive figure driven to despair and destruction by his unrequited love for the young Lottie, has become a pervasive literary archetype. The fact that Werther ends with the protagonist's suicide and funeral, a funeral which no clergyman attended, made the book deeply controversial upon its anonymous publication, for on the face of it, it appeared to condone and glorify suicide. Suicide was considered sinful by Christian doctrine. Suicides were denied Christian burial, with the bodies often mistreated and dishonored in various ways. In corollary, the deceased's property and possessions were often confiscated by the church. Epistolary novels were common during this time, letter writing being a primary mode of communication. What set Goethe's book apart from other such novels was its expression of unbridled longing for a joy beyond possibility, its sense of defiant rebellion against authority, and of principal importance, its total subjectivity, qualities that trailblazed the Romantic movement. The next work, his epic closet drama Faust, was to be completed in stages, and only published in its entirety after his death. The first part was published in 1808 and created a sensation. The first operatic version, by Spoo, appeared in 1814, and was subsequently the inspiration for operas and oratorios by Schumann, Berlioz, Gounod, Boito, Pisani, and Schnittke, as well as symphonic works by Liszt, Wagner, and Mahler. Faust became the myth of many figures in the 19th century. Later, a facet of its plot, that is, of selling one's soul to the devil for power over the physical world, took on increasing literary importance and became a view of the victory of technology and of industrialism, along with its dubious human expenses. In 1919, the Goetheanum staged the world premiere of a complete production of Faust. On occasion, the play is still staged in Germany and other parts around the world. Goethe's poetic work served as a model for an entire movement in German poetry termed Innerlichkeit, introversion, and represented by, for example, Heine. Goethe's words inspired a number of compositions by, among others, Mozart, Beethoven, who idolized Goethe, Schubert, Berlioz, and Wolf. Perhaps the single most influential piece is Mignon's Song, which opens with one of the most famous lines in German poetry, an allusion to Italy, Kennst du das Land, o die Zitronen Bluhn. Do you know the land where the lemon trees bloom? He is also widely quoted. Epigrams such as against criticism a man can neither protest nor defend himself. He must act in spite of it, and then it will gradually yield to him, divide and rule, a sound motto. Unite and lead, a better one, and enjoy when you can, and endure when you must, are still in usage or are often paraphrased. Lines from Faust, such as Das also wurde Pudelskern, Das ist der Weisheit letzter Schluss, or Grau ist alle Theory have entered everyday German usage. It may be taken as another measure of Goethe's fame that other well-known quotations are often incorrectly attributed to him, such as Hippocrates' art is long, life is short, which is found in Goethe's Faust, art is something so long to be learned, and life is so short. And Wilhelm Meister's apprenticeship.
Scientific work.
Although his literary work has attracted the greatest amount of interest, Goethe was also keenly involved in studies of natural science. He wrote several works on morphology and color theory. Goethe also had the largest private collection of minerals in all of Europe. By the time of his death, in order to gain a comprehensive view in geology, he had collected 17,800 rock samples. His focus on morphology and what was later called homology influenced 19th-century naturalists, although his ideas of transformation were about the continuous metamorphosis of living things and did not relate to contemporary ideas of transformism, or transmutation of species. Homology, or as Etienne Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire called it analogy, was used by Charles Darwin as strong evidence of common descent and of laws of variation. Goethe's studies led him to independently discover the human intermaxillary bone in 1784, which Broussonnet, 1779, and Vicdizet, 1780, had, using different methods, identified several years earlier. While not the only one in his time to question the prevailing view that this bone did not exist in humans, Goethe, who believed ancient anatomists had known about this bone, was the first to prove its peculiarity to all mammals. During his Italian journey, Goethe formulated a theory of plant metamorphosis in which the archetypal form of the plant is to be found in the leaf. He writes, "From top to bottom a plant is all leaf, united so inseparably with the future bud that one cannot be imagined without the other." In 1790, he published his Metamorphosis of Plants. As one of the many precursors in the history of evolutionary thought, Goethe wrote in Story of My Botanical Studies, 1831. Goethe also popularized the Goethe barometer using a principle established by Torricelli. According to Hegel, Goethe has occupied himself a good deal with meteorology. Barometer readings interested him particularly. What he says is important. The main thing is that he gives a comparative table of barometric readings during the whole month of December 1822, at Weimar, Jena, London, Boston, Vienna, Topol. He claims to deduce from it that the barometric level varies in the same proportion not only in each zone but that it has the same variation too, at different altitudes above sea level. In 1810, Goethe published his Theory of Colors, which he considered his most important work. In it, he contentiously characterized color as arising from the dynamic interplay of light and darkness through the mediation of a turbid medium. In 1816, Schopenhauer went on to develop his own theory in non-vision and colors based on the observations supplied in Goethe's book. After being translated into English by Charles Eastlake in 1840, his theory became widely adopted by the art world, most notably J.M.W. Turner. Goethe's work also inspired the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein to write his remarks on color. Goethe was vehemently opposed to Newton's analytic treatment of color, engaging instead in compiling a comprehensive rational description of a wide variety of color phenomena. Although the accuracy of Goethe's observations does not admit a great deal of criticism, his theory's failure to demonstrate significant predictive validity eventually rendered it scientifically irrelevant. Goethe was, however, the first to systematically study the physiological effects of color, and his observations on the effect of opposed colors led him to a symmetric arrangement of his color wheel, for the colors diametrically opposed to each other are those which reciprocally evoke each other in the eye. Goethe, Theory of Colors, 1810. In this, he anticipated Ewald Hering's opponent color theory, 1872. Goethe outlines his method in the essay The Experiment as Mediator between Subject and Object, 1772. In the Kirchner edition of Goethe's works, the science editor, Rudolf Steiner, presents Goethe's approach to science as phenomenological. Steiner elaborated on that in the books The Theory of Knowledge implicit in Goethe's world conception and Goethe's world view, in which he characterizes intuition as the instrument by which one grasps Goethe's biological archetype, the typus. Novalis, himself a geologist and mining engineer, expressed the opinion that Goethe was the first physicist of his time and epoch-making in the history of physics, writing that Goethe's studies of light, of the metamorphosis of plants and of insects were indications and proofs that the perfect educational lecture belongs in the artist's sphere of work, and that Goethe would be surpassed but only in the way in which the ancients can be surpassed, in inner content and force, in variety and depth, as an artist actually not, or only very little, for his rightness and intensity are perhaps already more exemplary than it would seem.
Eroticism.
Many of Goethe's works, especially Faust, the Roman elegies, and the Venetian epigrams, depict erotic passions and acts. For instance, in Faust, the first use of Faust's power after literally signing a contract with the devil is to fall in love with and impregnate a teenage girl. Some of the Venetian epigrams were held back from publication due to their sexual content. Goethe clearly saw human sexuality as a topic worthy of poetic and artistic depiction, an idea that was uncommon in a time when the private nature of sexuality was rigorously normative.
Religion and politics.
Born into a Lutheran family, Goethe's early faith was shaken by news of such events as the 1755 Lisbon earthquake and the 7 Years' War. In July 1782, he described himself as not anti-Christian, nor unchristian, but most decidedly non-Christian. In his Venetian epigram 66, Goethe listed 4 things that he disliked: tobacco smoke, bugs and garlic and the cross. In the book Conversations with Goethe by Goethe's secretary Eckermann, however, Goethe is portrayed as enthusiastic about Christianity, Jesus, Martin Luther, and the Protestant Reformation, even calling Christianity the ultimate religion. Although he opposed many of the central teachings of the Christian churches, he thought that he could nevertheless be inwardly Christian. His latest spiritual perspective evolved among pantheism, heavily influenced by Spinoza, humanism, and various elements of Western esotericism, as seen most vividly in Part 2 of Faust. According to Nietzsche, Goethe had a kind of almost joyous and trusting fatalism that has faith that only in the totality everything redeems itself and appears good and justified. On the other hand, a year before his death, in a letter to Sulpice Boissiere, Goethe wrote that he had the feeling that all his life he had been aspiring to qualify as one of the Hypsisterians, an ancient Jewish pagan sect of the Black Sea region. After describing his difficulties with mainstream religion, he mentioned that he had learned of this sect who, hemmed in between heathens, Jews and Christians, declared that they would reverence, as being close to the Godhead, what came to their knowledge of the best and most perfect. In politics, Goethe was conservative. At the time of the French Revolution, he thought the enthusiasm of the students and professors to be a perversion of their energy and remained skeptical of the ability of the masses to govern. Likewise, he did not oppose the War of Liberation, 1813-15, waged by the German states against Napoleon, and remained aloof from the patriotic efforts to unite the various parts of Germany into one nation.
Influence.
Goethe had a great effect on the 19th century. In many respects, he was the originator of many ideas which later became widespread. He produced volumes of poetry, essays, criticism, a theory of colors and early work on evolution and linguistics. He was fascinated by mineralogy, and the mineral goethite, iron oxide, is named after him. His non-fiction writings, most of which are philosophic and aphoristic in nature, spurred the development of many philosophers, including G.W.F. Hegel, Schopenhauer, Friedrich Nietzsche, Ernst Cassirer, Carl Jung, and Ludwig Wittgenstein. Along with Schiller, he was one of the leading figures of Weimar classicism. Goethe embodied many of the contending strands in art over the next century. His work could be lushly emotional, and rigorously formal, brief and epigrammatic, and epic. He would argue that classicism was the means of controlling art, and that romanticism was a sickness, even as he penned poetry rich in memorable images, and rewrote the formal rules of German poetry. Even in contemporary culture, he stands in the background as the author of the ballad upon which Disney's The Sorcerer's Apprentice is based. His poetry was set to music by almost every major Austrian and German composer from Mozart to Mahler, and his influence would spread to French drama and opera as well. Beethoven declared that a Faust symphony would be the greatest thing for art. Liszt and Mahler both created symphonies in whole or in large part inspired by this seminal work, which would give the 19th century one of its most paradigmatic figures, Dr. Faustus. The Faust tragedy-drama, often called Das Drama der Deutschen, the drama of the Germans, written in 2 parts published decades apart, would stand as his most characteristic and famous artistic creation. Followers of the 20th century esotericist Rudolf Steiner built a theatre named the Goetheanum after him, where festival performances of Faust are still performed. Goethe was also a cultural force, who argued that the organic nature of the land molded the people and their customs, an argument that has recurred ever since. He argued that laws could not be created by pure rationalism, since geography and history shaped habits and patterns. This stood in sharp contrast to the prevailing Enlightenment view that reason was sufficient to create well-ordered societies and good laws. It was to a considerable degree due to Goethe's reputation that the city of Weimar was chosen in 1919 as the venue for the National Assembly, convened to draft a new constitution for what would become known as Germany's Weimar Republic. The Federal Republic of Germany's cultural institution, The Goethe Institute is named after him, and promotes the study of German abroad and fosters knowledge about Germany by providing information on its culture, society and politics. The literary estate of Goethe in the Goethe and Schiller archives was inscribed on UNESCO's Memory of the World Register in 2001 in recognition of its historical significance. Goethe's influence was dramatic because he understood that there was a transition in European sensibilities, an increasing focus on sense, the indescribable, and the emotional. This is not to say that he was emotionalistic or excessive. On the contrary, he lauded personal restraint and felt that excess was a disease. There is nothing worse than imagination without taste. He argued in his scientific works that a formative impulse, which he said is operative in every organism, causes an organism to form itself according to its own distinct laws, and therefore rational laws or fiats could not be imposed at all from a higher, transcendent sphere. This placed him in direct opposition to those who attempted to form enlightened monarchies based on rational laws by, for example, Joseph II of Austria or the subsequent Emperor of the French, Napoleon. A quotation from Goethe's scientific studies will suffice. That change later became the basis for 19th-century thought, organic rather than geometrical, evolving rather than created, and based on sensibility and intuition rather than on imposed order, culminating in, as Goethe said, a living quality, wherein the subject and object are dissolved together in a poise of inquiry. Consequently, Goethe embraced neither teleological nor deterministic views of growth within every organism. Instead, his view was that the world as a whole grows through continual, external, and internal strife. Moreover, Goethe did not embrace the mechanistic views that contemporaneous science subsumed during his time, and therewith he denied rationality's superiority as the sole interpreter of reality. Furthermore, Goethe declared that all knowledge is related to humanity through its functional value alone and that knowledge presupposes a perspectival quality. He also stated that the fundamental nature of the world is aesthetic. His views make him, along with Adam Smith, Thomas Jefferson, and Ludwig van Beethoven, a figure in two worlds, on the one hand, devoted to the sense of taste, order, and finely crafted detail, which is the hallmark of the artistic sense of the Age of Reason in the neoclassical period of architecture. On the other, seeking a personal, intuitive, and personalized form of expression and society, firmly supporting the idea of self-regulating and organic systems. Thinkers such as Ralph Waldo Emerson would take up many similar ideas in the 1800s. Goethe's ideas on evolution would frame the question that Darwin and Wallace would approach within the scientific paradigm. The Serbian inventor and electrical engineer Nikola Tesla was heavily influenced by Goethe's Faust, his favorite poem, and had actually memorized the entire text. It was while reciting a certain verse that he was struck with the epiphany that would lead to the idea of the rotating magnetic field and ultimately, alternating current.
Bibliography.
The Life of Goethe by George Henry Lewis, Goethe, The History of a Man by Emil Ludwig, Goethe by Georg Brandes. Authorized translation from the Danish, 2nd ed. 1916, by Alan W. Porterfield, New York, Crown Publishers, 1936. Crown Edition, 1936. Title: Wolfgang Goethe, Goethe, His Life and Times by Richard Friedenthal, Lotte in OMR, The Beloved Returns by Thomas Mann, Conversations with Goethe by Johann Peter Eckermann, Goethe's World, as Seen in Letters and Memoirs ed. by Barthold Bauermann, Goethe, Four Studies by Albert Schweitzer, Goethe Poet and Thinker by E. M. Wilkinson and L. A. Willoughby, Goethe and His Publishers by Siegfried Amseld, Goethe by T. J. Reid, The Life of Goethe. A Critical Biography by John Williams, Goethe, The Poet and the Age, 2 vols. By Nicholas Boyle, Goethe's Concept of the Daemonic, After the Ancients, by Angus Nichols, Goethe and Rousseau, Resonances of Their Mind, by Karl Hammer, Jr., Dr. Faustus of the Popular Legend, Marlowe, The Puppet Play, Goethe, and Linau, Treated Historically and Critically. A Parallel Between Goethe and Schiller. An Historic Outline of German Literature, by Louis Pagel, Goethe and Schiller, Essays on German Literature, by Hjalmar Boysen, Tales for Transformation, trans. Scott Thompson, Goethe Wörterbuch, Goethe Dictionary, abbreviated GWB. Herausgeber von der Berlin-Brandenburgischen Akademie der Wissenschaften, der Akademie der Wissenschaften in Göttingen und der Heidelberger Akademie der Wissenschaften. Stuttgart. Verlag W. Kilhammer. ISBN 978-3-17-019121